Shavasti, we've touched on this topic before, the 3 levels of healing. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the pitfalls of those 3 levels of healing.
Rather than it being the pitfalls of the 3 levels of healing, but it's the pitfalls of healing and what we believe it to be. And so let me first explain my perception of the pitfalls of healing and what the 3 levels are. A lot of what I teach is part of a journey that I have taken. And so not everything that I share here is absolutely my original material. I've had teachers myself, I've been in programs, I've been at schools, and I've done a lot of work with lots of people over many, many years. And so I want to look at healing from our different levels of consciousness, because we're not just one level of consciousness. We have our emotional selves, we have our mental selves, and plus we also have our spiritual selves. And so the 3 levels can be neatly divided into what could be called pre-personal or pre-egoic or pre-verbal, personal, and then transpersonal. So pre-personal roughly relates to our chakras. We have 7 chakras. Well, actually we have more than 7 chakras, but we have 7 main chakras that have a correlation within the physical body. So each of the chakras, which is an energy center, is also an expression of our consciousness. And so the first and second chakra hold a lot of our awareness of when we were very young. It also holds basic feelings, such as survival, etc. And so a lot of our pre-personal, meaning all of our experiences from conception all the way up until about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. All of those experiences, all of that wounding, all of what we assume to be true about ourselves and our relationship to self as formed through relationship to others, that's held generally within those lower chakras. And here's the thing with calling those the lower chakras, even though they are physically lower, but we have created these notions that higher is good and higher is better and lower is worse. And as much of our wounding is also in the lower chakras, then this notion that lower is bad is then emphasized, that's then confirmed. So that's pre-personal, pre-verbal. And so what happens is that the wounding that has taken place at a very, very young age, we don't store that memory in the same way. So we remember the person who shouted at us 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We have a picture of it, we perhaps remember their name, we remember the circumstances, we remember how we felt at the time, and hopefully we're not still outraged by it 20 years later, but sometimes we are, depending on what it triggered at the time. So we have a different memory. And so what happened to us as children, what we experienced as children, what we experienced as a fetus, is just raw feeling. And so as adults, we construct our memory. And so we say, okay, I remember this incident, when this person said this, and when that person did that, that's how I felt about it. And so we can associate the feeling with an incident. So the incident could be, I had an accident and I ended up in hospital, or this person betrayed me, or my lover was unfaithful to me, or I got fired from that job, or I was deeply disappointed. And so we associate feelings with events and with people. And so what happens is we have these feelings, which can be terror, which can be rage, which can be deep loneliness, which can be deep isolation. absolute fear, feeling unwanted. And so we attempt then to associate that with an event. And so that can lead us to create stories that are simply not true. So what if, for example, on hearing the news that she is pregnant, your mother said, "I'm not sure that I want this child." Maybe she was 2 months into her pregnancy or 3 or 4 months into her pregnancy before she really made the decision, "I'm going to keep this child." Which means that you might have had the experience of 3 months or longer of being unwanted. That is all felt. That's all felt very keenly and very intensely. And so as adults we have that feeling of being unwanted, but because we have no conscious memory of receiving that feeling from our mother when we're in utero, we then have to construct a story to explain the feeling. And this is what we do. And we do that over and over and over and over again. And so dealing with pre-personal or pre-verbal wounding can be very challenging for individuals because it's very painful. But it's actually at the core of what holds all of our defenses in place. A lot of us have wounding that took place at a later stage as well. So I'm not saying that all of our core wounding took place whilst we were in the uterus or when we were a baby. But I'm trying to illustrate how on the level of the personality we create a lot of stories to explain feelings. And so the first level is pre-personal. And it's very, very important to look at the core of our relationship with ourselves. Because what happens in that case, when we are the unwanted child, whether it's expressed directly or indirectly to us, we draw a conclusion about that. We say, if I were good enough, pretty enough, slim enough, black enough, white enough, pretty enough, male enough, female enough, enough, something enough, then they would have wanted me. Therefore, guess whose fault it is? There is something wrong with me. And all of that is part of our foundational work, to look at the relationship with self, dialogue with self. That cannot be done in the mind. And so what happens is we have our other level of healing, which is personal. So we've got pre-personal, we have personal. And so there are some fantastic tools within the arena of personal healing. Really good tools. Tools that can teach us presentation skills, leadership skills. There are things like NLP, things that can teach us about how we think about things, how we view the world, how we perceive ourselves as a business or as a performer or as a sports person, whatever that might be. So there are lots of really, really good tools out there. And I'm not wanting to dismiss any of them, but it's about being aware of where does the work need to be done here? Where does it need to be done? So if you do your foundational work and do a lot of that clearing in the foundation in terms of the relationship with self, once we've addressed and looked at self-hatred, once we've addressed and looked at feeling completely separate from the world and other human beings, through these feelings of isolation from when we were very, very young, of having a mother that was too busy or parents that were too busy to really spend quality time with us as an infant. Once we've looked at that, then the work that we do with the leadership trainer, with the coach, with the NLP expert is then exponentially much, much more successful. It is exponentially much better because then there is a foundation of knowing your own worth in which to add these other tools and schooling to that. What happens is we try to add all of that to a foundation of self-hatred. So what happens? Will becomes expanded exponentially, and so we become these will-driven individuals that try to create success as an object to grasp for. So just as I have previously spoken about magnificence. And so on the personal level is also looking at our relationships with others. We're looking at hidden loyalties. We're looking at relationships to the good parent. Because very often our deepest entanglement is with the good parent, not with the bad parent. We know the bad parent's the bad parent. So what about our loyalty to the good parent? Are we there living in defense of the emotional needs of the good parent? Have we made it our job and our responsibility to look after the good parent and to reject the bad parent out of loyalty to the good parent? And so on the personal level, we then begin to look at our relationships. I spent many years working on that level through my work with family constellations and with ancestral healing, looking at that on the personal level. It's a very important part of our work to look at where we are within the family system and where we are in relationship to our ancestors. And a little bit later I will then talk about hidden loyalties. Then we have transpersonal work. And so that is being in contact with our inner self. One of my great teachers, Patricia, spoke about the inner dwelling being, and I love that, when we dwell inwardly. And so what we often see in spiritual communities is that individuals are sitting in this atmosphere and this notion of the transpersonal being able to resolve everything. And if we look at this from a chakra point of view, those of us who are will-driven are largely sitting in our solar plexus, or we're holding a lot of energy in our backs and we're pushing it forward and pushing it forward and pushing it forward. So those who are caught in the notion that transpersonal work can solve everything are living in their upper chakras. And what often happens with that, very sadly, is that when you're living in your upper chakras, and a lot of it is living from the third eye, you are projecting onto the world an ideal of what you think it should be. So in fact, you don't even see who's standing right in front of you. You see an image of what you want the person to be, or even worse, what you think they should be. And so you measure people according to how spiritual they are, or how nice they are, or how reasonable they are, or how in harmony with the environment they are, or how politically correct that they are. And so this whole dimension of human relationships is then missed. What is bypassed all the time is the heart. Foundational work is extremely important. For our chakra system, it is, I was going to say hierarchical. I don't mean hierarchical. One builds on top of the other. The energy comes in through our base chakra. It comes in through the base chakra. When the first chakra is closed, there's no energy coming up to support the heart. The heart is supported by the chakras underneath it. It is like a multi-story building. And so many of us are trying to live in a building that has a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th floor, but no first floor or basement. So it's just floating in the middle of the air. And so when we don't do our foundational work, then there is no support for the heart. When there is no support for the heart, we miss what is right in front of us. And when we start believing that transpersonal work will solve everything, we are so blinded by the light that we don't even see what's right in front of us. And what is right in front of us is another human being. And so when we begin to meet that which is stored in our foundation, the fears, the hatred, the self-hatred, the self-loathing, the worthlessness, the loneliness, and the emptiness, all of that leads to a foundation for the renewed, compassionate human being, which then allows us to start feeling our own magnificence. So all of these topics are related. So the 3 levels of healing are very important to understand what that is and where you are in your own process. And it's actually what is necessary, probably at all times, is a little bit of all 3 on a continual basis. It's good to develop manners. It's good to develop assertiveness when you have that. It's good to develop leadership skills and presentation skills. None of those are wrong. But if you think that any of those are going to change how you fundamentally feel about yourself, then that is a great misconception. It just leads to forcing more energy into will, and you still end up empty-handed. All the money in the world, all the success in the world, but deeply lonely, because you're cut off from your essential self.
Thank you.
You're welcome.